So I am going to bring in PK. Pronouns he, him, comes from New York. And PK, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, PK, you said you got some natural theology for us, so take it away.
Yeah, so have you watched a show called Dragon Ball Z?
I've watched clips.
I do remember in the 1990s there was some kids' cartoon that, if I remember correctly, there was a girl dressed in a Playboy cocktail outfit, and she was part of that show. Is that the same show? I was trying to figure out why there was a children's cartoon that had a main character dressed like a Playboy cocktail waitress. I think that was Dragon Ball Z.
Did you have like blue hair or something? I mean, there's Bulma.
I don't know that I noticed hair, and in a cartoon I probably wouldn't have noticed it if it was blue.
Okay.
Nonetheless, what about Dragon Ball Z or
Playboy cocktail waitress in a children's cartoon? That's what I remember.
All right, this conversation is already over 9,000.
Yep.
PK, were you just hit with a kamehameha? You lost your breath.
Yeah, I'm once again, I'm going to suggest not so many gummies.
All right.
Yeah, I was going to ask about. So yeah, I was going to talk about Stout.
PK, maybe we should try another time. It sounds like you might be a little bit indisposed.
Yeah.
No, it's about asexual versus sexual reproduction and why one overtook the other. So do you think that's a fluke of nature?
Why did sexual reproduction dominate over asexual? Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, like bacteria.
Disease resistance.
Yeah, bacteria can get resistance to our medicine pretty quickly. So it's like, why didn't asexual?
Yeah, but bacteria doesn't use sexual reproduction. Bacteria is asymmetrical. We're talking about disease resistance. So there are certain vertebrates that will switch back and forth from asexual to sexual reproduction. And they do this when they're normally asexual. There's like certain kind of cichlid fish, if I remember, in ponds in Mexico, that they normally reproduce asexually unless there's a disease infectant involved. And then they switch to sexual reproduction because that enables a faster evolution to resist the disease infection.
Okay, that's in the minority though. That's probably
that's what
you can do that.
It's also worth noting, PK, that there also are many bacteria that actually swap genomes. They basically do some DNA swapping. It's not quite the same as sex, but it's the same ultimate purpose of by sharing the genes around, you get better, you get more combinations and more opportunities to have traits spread through a population that are successful. That's the main reason sex drives things. You might even say there's a sex drive.
Okay. I mean, bacteria can do it without that too, right? So it's like, why isn't there like a 50%?
Yes, but bacteria doesn't suffer from disease so much as causes. And there are bacteriophages, so bacteria get diseases too, and they're just because they don't have the option to switch to sexual reproduction, they're just doomed.
Okay. Okay, but I mean, some sexual species are doomed too because they can't reproduce as quickly to like a changing environment. While like an asexual species can reproduce quickly if like conditions are very favorable. So in our current like ecosystem now, why aren't
one thing to also note though is the creatures that tend to be more often going by sexual reproduction are complex organisms, multicellular organisms like creatures like us. And individuals like that don't have mutations that change us as radically or as quickly as it does, say, with bacteria. And our very long gestation times means if somebody has a positive trait, the only way it's going to actually spread out somewhat quickly is if somehow that gene can actually be spread across more than just the most immediate clone ancestor of that person, because again, of our slower reproduction time. So I think that's a factor into why complex organisms tend to do more sexual than asexual reproduction. Admittedly, this is well outside my knowledge base, but I think that's part of the reason why single cell organisms tend to do plenty of asexual reproduction, complex organisms, primarily sexual reproduction. There's a trade-off basically as you move up the complexity of organisms.
Okay.
At the very least, nothing that seems to point to anything supernatural. It seems to be more a matter of what helps the numbers in terms of natural selection.
Yeah, that's going back. Yeah, that's, so the point was, what would an asexual reproduction majority world look like compared to a sexual reproduction majority world?
Well,
Like
think
an
of it this way.
asexual, I mean, I don't think there would
Well, think of it
be
this way.
as
PK,
many
let's suppose
strong
you
bonds.
could asexually. Let's just say this. PK, let's say you could asexually reproduce. What would your children look like?
Same as me, pretty much. That's why I was going to mention Cell from DBZ. You just have like mini clones.
Okay. So the thing is, though, if you have a trait that isn't that well adapted to the environment, you and all of your clones are done for. You don't have the ability to actually somewhat quickly adjust to changes in environments. Your genome is basically kaput. Because if you and your clones don't have any ability to really change genetically to the environment, you're SOL. Bacteria can at least change asexually more quickly because they have smaller genomes, are generally quote unquote simpler. So they have that advantage that we humans don't quite have.
I mean, don't you? I mean, all you need is a higher mutation rate. You don't have to have like sexual.
And if you'll
What's
notice,
the
you
easiest
can
way
have
to accelerate
mutations
that?
All nature needed to do was create a high mutation rate in that asexual species. I mean, after billions of years, don't you think we should have had like at least one species that does that?
The higher
more
mutation
complex
rate leads
organism?
to instability.
I mean, sure.
You can have a
but you still
stable
have-
species, then you need a lower mutation rate.
And all the more so if we're talking a multicellular organism, because a mutation is going to happen random in one cell. How does that coordinate well with the trillions of other cells in your body? If they're all mutating at a high rate, they're not going to coordinate. You're just going to become a giant lump of cancers.
Yep.
Okay, I mean, not that high of a mutation rate, but just enough to create more diversity in that asexual species. I feel like
You
after so
increase
many
the
millions of years,
mutation
you'd have-
rate. You increase the mutation rate, you decrease the stability.
And when you have organisms with literally trillions of cells, the chances of that all nicely coordinating out at that high mutation rate is extremely low, which means that the advantage would be sexual versus asexual reproduction.
Well, okay, not all the cells have to mutate, like just the sexual cells that are used for reproduction.
You still have to have all those cells coordinating with each other, especially in the child popping out.
So wait, are you saying it's impossible to have a multicellular asexual species?
No,
No, because there
I
are
already
some.
described how we have vertebrates, by definition, multicellular, and they're asexual. The New Mexico whiptail lizard is a fine example. They're all females. They're all clones of each other. They don't. The interesting thing is that in order to ovulate, I mean, they're going to give birth to clones. They're giving birth to themselves, but they need the sexual stimulus in order to cause the ovulation, which is a weird thing. So they have to have sexual mating, but there are no males. So they have to mate with other females. So it's
So okay, how
lesbian
did they
lizard sex.
survive? how did they survive all these millions of years of evolution against sexual species? Then
I'm sorry,
should be
what?
extinct by now.
What?
Shouldn't these species be extinct by now?
Why?
I mean, how did they even evolve after like 1 billion
Because
years?
they evolved from
After-
sexually reproductive lizards. And a certain lineage of whiptail lizard, one lineage of whiptail lizard, adopted parthenogenesis by mutation. So they're parthenogenic. And now the entire species is just clones of each other.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying we should expect more of this in nature than just like one or two like lizard species.
It's a weird thing that you're saying
There
that
should
we
be
should
more
expect
there
more
are
something
more
that we
examples.
don't see.
There are more examples, but what number of them do there need to be? I don't get the quandary here.
I think more importantly to me, PK, I don't see the reason why you would actually expect the majority of multicellular, especially vertebrate creatures, to be asexually reproducing. As I've noted, there's some major trade-offs between one thing versus the other. So, like, what model can you actually use to show that we should expect asexual reproduction to be dominant in complex organisms like vertebrates?
Yeah, I mean, you said that there were no
reproduce faster?
multicellular organisms that reproduce this way, so I gave you an example of several of a multicellular organism that really does reproduce this way.
So does it reproduce faster than the asexual one? Because it doesn't need to find a mate.
Does it reproduce faster?
Yeah.
I mean, does it evolve faster?
No, does it reproduce?
No, they don't evolve very fast because they're clones of each other. Without sexual reproduction, I mean, sexual reproduction is the way that you put evolution in second gear.
Yeah. So those lizards that don't need to find a mate should be out competing the lizards today that do need to find a mate.
Which is also why they're a minority. There are extremely few examples of asexual lizards. So that would seem to be exactly what we'd expect. It's only rare that you find vertebrates that are asexual.
And since they are an asexual species, they're not looking for males of a different species to mate with. So they're not competing with nor mating with another.
They're competing for resources. Like they should be able. They should be able to push them out just through reproduction speed.
For whatever reason, in their situation, they haven't been driven to extinction by competition with other lizards.
In nature, would say they found their niche.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, I guess.
Okay.
I mean,
I do have to admit, the evolution or non-evolution of asexual species, the fact there are any asexual vertebrates is already quite fascinating to me. And how this species actually developed is, to me, an interesting scientific question that I don't know the answer to, and I would love to know more about it. To me, it's an interesting scientific question. I guess ultimately, though, how is this ever going to get us to even contemplating the God question? I'm not seeing the connection between what you were bringing up and apparently a natural theology argument.
Yeah, so I was just going to bring that. Like, it would be like a +1 point towards God, I guess, because of what the type of societies that would come up from like an asexual society versus a sexual reproducing society. One creates deeper bonds.
I would suppose different societies would create different mythologies. Like if bears ruled the world and had civilizations, their gods would look different than the ones that humans have imagined. But don't think that's an argument in favor.
I would hope that bears would not suffer the same situation as we, where we invent gods and religion and then, penalize and kill anybody who doesn't make believe the same thing we make believe.
No, I was referring more to like the types of bonds that would form between people or between species, like a mother and a child, and then the bond between the mother and the father.
I'm not hearing everything you're saying.
Yeah, basically, I'm just referring to deeper bonds that are formed between
deeper bonds.
Sexual, okay. Yeah, like a family unit versus like an asexual reproducing organism. It's not going to have the same, I guess, pleasure, drive to, I guess, bond with its own children or with other members of society. It's not going to have the same like romantic feelings or, yeah, the tight bonds that form between people when they have romantic interest between each other. It's going to be a more strange, like isolated society, which is why I would think it's like one, like the sexual one is like a plus one toward God, the asexual one, like a more atheistic world, I guess.
So I guess I don't see the thing here because why would you expect God to want sexual civilizations? That seems to be a completely arbitrary premise to just deal with the fact that the God of the Bible, for example, is really into this whole sex thing. He cares about it a lot. So
Well,
that
he
must
invented
somehow be
lesbian
natural to
lizards.
gods.
Well,
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
feels like we're back rationalizing ultimately because if we were completely asexual and all humans were clones of each other, then we would explain why God made the most perfect universe by making us all identical. So that way we are truly all equal because we're actually all the same. See, it's pretty easy to make these sort of theological arguments after the fact.
well, no, they would be able to look back at like evolution's trajectory in choosing
Right. And
asexual
I'm
versus
just saying, whatever
sexual.
that outcome
And
is, we could come
so
up with
if you
some
had like
theological argument for why God made it that way. And that's why these
no,
sorts of arguments
if you had,
pretty much go no place
if,
fast.
if human society was mostly asexual, and we looked back at evolution and said, why did it choose asexual over sexual? Where we could have had better bonds, stronger pleasure systems between us and our children and our spouses. Why would God
The
choose
fact that
more
we love our mates
older relationships?
as well as our children, and our children are a combination of us and our mates, that's a whole other bond unto itself.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Can you repeat
Just to
that one more
change
time?
things a bit, PK, if having people bond together to have children so that way they love their children more, wouldn't that argue then that we shouldn't be a bisexual reproduction species, but trisexual or quadrisexual, that 4, 5, 10, 30 people have to come together to have a baby? Because that would show truly powerful bonds if it takes that to produce a child.
I don't think we'd be able to manage 40 people in a relationship. I think the child would be super lost. They wouldn't be able to like have a meaningful relationship
But
with
wouldn't
40
that produce
people
an even more
in one
powerful
lifetime.
bond if it takes all of that to bring up one child? If the argument is we have pair bonding
I
so
think
that way we have stronger relations, then even bigger relationships would be even stronger. So your argument would actually perpetuate us to always wondering why we don't have more and more people basically hopping into the sex pile to make more humans.
I
I
think
thought it took a village to raise a child. I heard that somewhere.
I mean that's the point of having relatives and cousins and extended family that do help in our current society.
But you're
So
saying though that it's actually the sexual pair bonding that makes those things stronger. So I'm saying let's make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you want a science fiction example, there's an Isaac Asimov story called The Gods Themselves, which has as part of the story a trisexual species where there are basically three sexes that have to ultimately join together to create their offspring. Ultimately, it's an interesting story, though it also has some um, problematic things when read through a feminist lens, to put it mildly. Um, but it gives the
I mean
idea, at
if you're
least to
gonna
me, it's at least conceivable to have three different sexes having to come together to have children. And if two pairs bonding is supposed to be powerful, three is even more so because it's even more effort to make that bonding work. And then three is more than two, but four is also more than three, five is more than four, and so on. So I'm saying your argument should basically explode on itself that really the ideal relationship in the mind of the ultimate creator would be everyone has to get together to have sex to have babies. And so literally we should all be in the sex pile right now.
I don't think evolution would like 40 organisms hopping in together to produce one. That would take way too long, and they would probably just run extinct
So in
before they
other
even
words,
produce
there's a
10 babies.
natural reason why. And if there's a natural reason, we don't need a God to explain any of it.
There's, I mean, there's natural reasons, but I'm just focusing on why it took one path over the other when they're both like equally
But the thing
almost.
is, you are also giving arguments to me to explain why we have pair bonding rather than trinary bonding or quaternary bonding or anything else more complex, ultimately for natural, practical reasons. And if that's the case, then we don't need any sort of theism to even begin to explain what's going on. It's ultimately a numbers game, it's game theory, it's completely explicable in terms of completely secular genetics and mathematics. So again, I don't see where God comes into this.
I'm not entirely comfortable with you all these requests that I be trisexual, because I think there's an implication there. And your suggestion that we should just all jump on the sex pile, I haven't had any gummies, and I think I would need that.
I'm more thinking back to an episode of South Park. The people coming back from the future, and so the people of South Park decided they're going to destroy the future by everyone just having a big sex pile and not actually reproducing. Just everyone hop in the pile.
Okay, yeah, I remember college.
Okay, I guess we can move on from this one. The next
Okay.
one I was going to point out was probably something you already heard: the uniqueness of solar eclipses for our planet.
The uniqueness of what?
Total solar eclipses for our planet. We
Oh,
have the sun being
here's the thing.
400 times farther away, and then the moon is like
Well,
400
here's the
times
thing, though.
smaller, but they perfectly align.
The thing is, though, is that they don't,
According to
because sometimes the
Neil,
moon is actually in a elliptical orbit. So sometimes it's closer, and you don't get a total eclipse. You get what we call an annular eclipse. So basically, the sun is able to peek around the entire moon, and you get a ring, an annus for the Latin for why it's called annular. For having a total solar eclipse, all you have to do is just have the moon closer, so its apparent size is greater than that of the sun. So it's not perfect because the size of the apparent size of the moon changes throughout the month, and the apparent size of the sun very, very slightly varies throughout the year.
Maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying, but I thought annular. The only problem with annular is one, it's messy, and two, requires more lube.
yeah. So what I'm basically saying is, yeah, we do have different eclipses. Pretty much all of them, right? Like transit, annular, lunar. But what I'm saying is, our planet has the most, I guess, one of the most unique ones, which is the perfect total eclipse, which is like I don't know,
But
once or
here's the thing:
twice a
as I
year.
just pointed out, it's not perfect.
They don't perfectly
Have you
align.
noticed that how we do our calendars, how we do our time?
Them.
Have you noticed that nothing lines up exactly the way you'd think it should, right? There's no regular demarcation like of anything. We have the way that the planet rotates. You can say that that's a day. That's when the sun comes up, the sun goes down. From our perspective, we can count that out as a day. But then, what is a year? What is a month? And how long is a day? Is it 23 point what hours? Right? Why is it not 24? Why can't we get anything to be exactly even numbers, just like you would expect of anything that was artificially created? Why do we have to have leap years? Why do we have to have alternating, or why do we have to alter our calendars to make up for this loss of time or whatever? Why is it 7 days in a week? Not 5 or 10. And why did none of them match up? Why do we have to have an extra day every 4th February? Because nothing matches up the way you would expect it to be if it was created.
Honestly, I have no idea about calendars. So I don't know how to answer that. But okay. So I guess what I would, for this point, I'd expect our planet to have the more messier solar eclipses, like compared to Mars or Venus or Jupiter or Saturn, rather than us having the instances.
Well, the thing is, though, it is
like
messy.
once or
As I've
twice a year.
noted, sometimes we have total, sometimes we don't have total solar eclipses. And it's also worth noting, if we go back in time, the moon was closer to the Earth. So I would have to see what the math is for how far back in time. But go back whatever number of millions of years, every eclipse would be a total solar eclipse, not an annular solar eclipse. We are in a time
Yeah,
where we get both, and in the future, we'll only get annular and later barely even that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, that fits.
so the thing
And
is,
what we would
our
today,
system isn't perfect.
what we would today
It was
count
like
as a
600 million
partial
years
eclipse
ago.
would be a total eclipse, and there would be a lot more of them.
Yeah, so like 600 million years ago, and then 600 million years into the future, there would not be the perfect total eclipses, which just so happens to be visible for intelligent species for us. I mean, how
But
rare
here's
is
the thing:
that?
as I've noted, if you're saying total solar eclipses is a sign of perfection, then going back in time would show that back then it was even more perfect because you go far enough, you don't get annular solar eclipses at all.
No, back then you wouldn't get any perfect total eclipses. You just have partial, or I don't know.
You keep saying this word perfect, and here's the thing: there's no such thing as perfect. If you want a total solar eclipse, the moon just has to be bigger than the sun, apparently in the sky. That's all that's needed for a total eclipse.
But yeah, I'm not saying total only. I'm saying it has to be the same exact moon size visible from the Earth to the same exact sun size visible from the Earth. That's what
But again, I
I'm
just
referring to.
said
Something perfect.
that isn't true. What you just said is false. You don't need them to be perfectly the same size to have a total eclipse. All you have to have is
Yeah,
the
I'm
moon
not saying.
bigger
I'm not
than the
saying.
sun.
Yeah, I realize the moon can be a little bit larger, and it can still be a total. That's what I'm saying. I'm referring to our unique moon in sun size. Like for example, you can see the the outer corona. I don't know what they call it, Bailey's beads or something, around the moon, and uh,
Let's look at it this
I guess
way: Jupiter, Jupiter. If Jupiter was a bit bigger, then I'm not sure how much bigger it would have to be, but if it was a bit bigger, then there's the smallest type of star. You know, you could Jupiter could be a brown dwarf, something like that. Jupiter could be a star, and if Jupiter were a star and it's inside of our solar system, that would mean that we are a binary system. And if we lived in one of these very rare binary systems, then your argument today would be the perfection of having two stars, especially when one eclipsed the other. When again, that has nothing to do with whether there's a God or not, doesn't imply perfection in any way.
uh, a sun eclipsing a sun. Uh, wouldn't that just destroy the planet?
What?
No,
We have
if
like
Jupiter were large enough to actually have atomic fusion, it would be a star, and if it were dim enough that it would warm Earth, yes, but it wouldn't necessarily cook us. And we could have the case that because Jupiter would still be going around the sun, we could have an alignment where our sun is covering Jupiter, so we'd literally have a star eclipsing a star, and that would be
Yeah,
what we would
and not only
call
that, but
pretty cool.
Jupiter's a hell of a lot smaller than the sun and further away from us than the sun. So it would have a negligible effect on our planet.
yeah, I mean that would be cool, but we don't have that here.
So God failed.
Yeah, but if we did, that would be an argument for God, right? I mean, whatever makes us different, unique than every other thing we can think of, that means God, right?
I guess if we have more alignment on this planet and all the other planets are just like floppy, then that would be a point for God. Yeah.
How's the fact that some of the planets are tilted at the wrong angle? How does that work for the perfection argument? How does the ellipses
There's no
of the orbits, I mean,
intelligent.
like Pluto, for example, sometimes darts into and then back out of Neptune's orbit. Sometimes, well, back when Pluto was considered a planet, it was not always the furthest planet because sometimes it'd be closer to the sun than Neptune is.
Yeah, yeah. So there's no purpose for those planets, really. There's no intelligent species on those, right?
What does intelligent species have to do with anything?
I mean, the whole point of the perfect eclipses is for the species below to appreciate like the alignment above.
My dear unassuming wife just posted in the chat. Uranus is really windy. I know what you mean to imply there. Uranus is really windy.
Yeah. But here's the thing, PK. If you're going to say the reason we have total solar eclipses, so humans can look at them and be in awe of that, well, here's the thing. That's kind of failed because there's a long history of an eclipse happening and people freaking out and thinking it's the end of the world. So didn't
In the
quite work
Quran,
out as expected.
that's even a description for how to know that the world is about to end.
That's
And then, of course,
intended
when there
purpose, right?
was a full eclipse over Arabia, they, of course, just came up with an apologetic excuse for why, when the Quran said that, that's not what it meant.
Sorry, what's the point about the Quran?
In the Quran, it says that the sun will never overtake the moon, nor the moon overtake the sun.
Oh.
But on the day that happens, that will be a sign of the last day. And that means that if there was ever an eclipse, that would be the last day, the day of judgment. However, there was a solar eclipse over Saudi Arabia, over the city of Medina. I can't remember when it was. But when that happened, of course, there was a bunch of people who had read the Quran for their whole lives and said, this is it. This is the end of times. And then there had to be apologists that say, well, when the Quran said exactly that, that's not what it meant.
That would be, I mean, they probably knew about eclipses before then. So I think they probably mean like the sun and moon that just collide into each other.
Not in the 700s, not in 650 or whatever it was that the Quran was first composed. No, they didn't. Some people might have. Know. Muhammad didn't. Muhammad thought that the earth was flat and that the sun and the moon were both the same size, that they were both bigger than all the stars, and that the stars were just lights set into the solid domicile of the firmament that could be removed from the sky by angels who could just disconnect them from the sky to use them as projectile weapons against genies.
If we want to go also roughly the same time, we have some interesting writings from St. Augustine, because before he was a Christian, he was in this other religious sect called the Manichaeans, and he, Augustus and other Manichaeans, believed that a solar eclipse was actually the sun and moon in battle with each other, that this was actually a cosmic fight happening. And only when he learned some basic astronomy to realize, oh, those eclipses, yeah, here in Rome, we can predict them years ahead into the future. And that was actually part of the reason Augustus left Manichaeism and then picked up eventually a different religion, but for somewhat scientific reasons. You have all sorts of other myths from China and from the Mediterranean that when a solar eclipse is happening, it's some sort of giant wolf or giant dragon trying to eat the sun, and people would bring out their pots and pans and start smashing them to try to scare away the beast that's trying to eat the moon. These are the sorts of things that are happening across the world in mythology, suggesting when a solar eclipse was happening, it was supposed to be bad news. It's only in our more scientific minds realizing, hey, we can predict these. That's pretty cool. Hey, we could even use these for scientific observations like they did for the bending of starlight to prove Einstein's general theory of relativity. This is moderns coming in, changing their view of things based on becoming more scientific. If the point of the cosmic dance was to make people in awe and lead us to good things, it took a long time to get there, and by other means than being in awe of things by religious thinking. It was ultimately by cold hard observation, calculation, theorization, testing, all the stuff that religion avoids like the plague because it so often puts religion in a bad light.
Okay, I mean, yeah, but the pattern here is that all of these different cultures took warning to that, I guess, happening. So whichever god they worshipped or whatever significance they gave to it, it still like forced them to look up and to pause their daily life and to reflect on what could possibly be further out there that's causing this. That's unusual.
Well, the thing is, they thought what was further out there was a giant dome of water. It didn't really help them all that much.
Well, I wouldn't expect them to give them like more scientific understanding then, but more like
exactly.
Spiritual.
So, like I say, that it didn't actually help them spiritually either, because often these sorts of things are like, hey, the sun's getting weak, we better sacrifice some more virgins. This seems to have been partially what happened in like Maya or Aztec culture. To help rejuvenate the sun, you got to start ripping people's hearts out, for spiritual reasons.
My thought is, when you're talking about, well, if there is no God, then why are things exactly the way they are? If there is a God, why doesn't he do something godly? Why don't we all know about him? I mean, like in Gotham City, everybody knows there's a Batman. It's not like an urban legend. I mean, the people can verify, there's a Batman. But you can't do that with God. And if you could do that with God, it would be different gods. So, well, I know God exists because I have a personal relationship with him, and his name is Lord Krishna.
Yeah, I think getting to more specific gods would be more difficult, but I think everyone can. Well, how about this question? Why isn't our moon? Why do we have to
Why
have
is what?
why do we have to have the most best moon in the solar system? Why don't we have a potato moon?
Aaron, can you hear? I know you've got headphones on. I'm afraid to turn my volume up all that much.
So, all right. So what he is saying is, why is our moon so perfect? Why is it that it's not potato shaped? Simple fact is, you make things big enough, gravity makes them round. So there's nothing mysterious or supernatural about that. Big things get round.
Yeah.
But isn't there a process by which the moon got larger? I don't know what the exact theory is.
It's by being mass enough in the first place. So the creation of the moon, our best hypothesis for that was an early collision between the Earth and a planet-sized object early in the formation of the solar system. They'll usually call this object Thera. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, Thea.
And it basically
sorry.
was. Yeah. Thea, because it's the feminine form of God. So we literally got hit by a goddess.
It was roughly the size of Mars.
Yeah.
And of course, the Earth wasn't all that big at that time either, because it absorbed this other thing. And the moon is a product of that impact.
Okay.
And if that's difficult to understand, and it might be, there are simulations, computer simulations, that'll show how the impact of Thea against the early Earth could have produced the moon as ejecta from that impact.
So why doesn't Mars, for example, have a moon like ours?
It didn't get smacked up by the head
Venus
like we did.
have a moon like Earth? Why doesn't Earth have 9 moons like Jupiter?
Because they're all potatoes.
Why does it matter?
And all the Jovian moons are
If there was a God, then why is the Bible wrong about everything having to do with cosmology? Why is the cosmos 78, the observable cosmos 78 billion light years across? Or is it trillion now? I forget. Why is it that we have this infinite amount of wasted space when we can only exist temporarily on a fraction of the skin of this one tiny mote of dust, and everything everywhere will kill us instantly otherwise?
Probably because we're not supposed to be here for too long, like in the, I guess, Hindu.
Why would you imagine you're a god and you create 11 jillion galaxies, each of which has hundreds of billions of stars, most of which have multiple planets on them. And you're going to base the entire creation of everything around this one rock. Totally insignificant, off to the side of everything, but you created everything for this rock and for the people who exist only temporarily on this rock.
We still have like a trillion years into the future. We might go to other galaxies.
There's a trillion galaxies.
Take over.
And we're only one of hundreds of billions of planets hundreds of billions of stars in this one galaxy. And there's billions of galaxies. Why the fuck? Clearly, there is no God. Clearly, the Bible's wrong about everything. And so is the Quran. All of it. Got everything wrong.
Or, I guess, either people evacuated, they're not supposed to be here, they went somewhere else that's better, or this is just the start, and we eventually might.
Aaron, what is he saying?
I am a little bit lost at this point because I don't think we're arguing for theism anymore. I think we're arguing for humans will somehow survive the destruction of what we do to this planet or what happens to the planet.
Yeah, that was a
and I am hopeful. I do hope we survive for a while, but at the very least, I think we've gotten pretty far away from anything with natural theology, and I think we need to take one more call before we call it tonight. So, PK, I think I do need to let you go for the evening.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, that was fun.
All right.
Good luck on your next call.
All right.
Thank you kindly.
You have a good night.
Hey, if you liked this video, why don't you click that like button?
And if you didn't
That's
like
where
it,
you would say,
subscribe.
Okay.
Oh, you didn't even give me a chance.
There was such a long pause. Too much
What?
dead air.
What are you on speed or
All right, let's
something? I barely had a
Let's
chance.
try again. Hey, I hope you liked. Hey, I hope you. Fuck. Hey there. I hope you liked that clip. Hey, I hope you liked that clipper just now, the one that you just watched with your eyes. If you did like it, why don't you click that like button?
And if you didn't like it, tell Jimmy to go fuck himself.
Hey, I hope you liked that clip right now. If you did like it, why don't you hit that like button?
And if you didn't like it, go ahead and subscribe anyway.